from their applied rate to bound rate is over. Gate prices, this is gone. If it's signed. Not every country supports this. By the way, Japan doesn't support this section, but virtually all members do. Special products. Developing countries can designate an additional number of tariff lines, still to be determined, for lower tariff reduction without allowing increased free import volumes. This is an area of continued focus and debate. Special safeguard mechanism for developing countries, least developed countries, only 14 have been identified, and this is to allow them to halt imports during critical harvest periods for subsistence farmers. And again, the current text is elimination of export subsidies by 2013 and 2016 for developed and developing countries. Overall trade distorting subsidies, AMBER, which is also called aggregated measures of support, the most trade distorting, and blue, trade distorting subsidies that also have production limitations, and de minimis, small, will be cut by 80% by the EU, 70% by Japan, 55% in all other countries, with a special target being negotiated specifically for the United States. There's also a focus on making sure that non-trading distorting subsidies truly are not in any way connected to production stimulation. And as well, cotton subsidies will be cut more than others and will be cut at the beginning. And on food aid, there will be a new safe box which will allow for efficient and maximum flexibility to deliver credible emergency food aid when a food crisis is defined by an international organization. So the current status of the WTO, there are 153 current members with 29 countries seeking access or working their way through the accreditation process. This by itself is a significant achievement of world trade, growth, and harmony, even if the current negotiations are in difficulty. And I want to say, we consider right now the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, the grouping of trade-dependent agriculture sectors in Canada, just spent a week in Geneva, and I can't share your complete pessimism. The word back we got is, it's hopeful and almost optimistic. The current belief is after the November 2010 U.S. midterm elections, you will see a significant movement by the U.S. to engage, and until the U.S. engages, nobody else can move ahead. Europe is ready to sign the deal as it is. Brazil is pushing very hard along with Australia to move ahead as well. India needs to be brought in. China needs to be brought in. But we believe that there's an opportunity for this to get done in 2011 before the 2012 presidential elections. I'm going to do only a couple of slides on bilateral and regional trade agreements. Definitely they became more prominent following the Uruguay round, when some countries wanted to have more improvement on tariff elimination. Basically, it does extend liberalization through reduction and elimination of import tariffs on select products of mutual interest between consenting countries. But it doesn't deal with a lot of other issues. It tends not to deal with export subsidies, trade distorting domestic subsidies, and typically the sanitary and phytosanitary agreements are subordinate to the WTO. Otherwise, they're not particularly binding. The pace of regional trade negotiations increased after the failure of the 2005 Cancun Agreement. And some people believe it was the large countries going out and cutting deals to force everybody else back to the table. Others believe it was the large countries giving up on the WTO and said, we're going to go get our own trade advantage without the WTO. And quite frankly, I think both motivations are at play. Right now, the WTO has 474 free trade and regional trade agreement notified to them. Approximately 90% are FTAs and 10% are customs unions. Each FTA is unique. The largest and most comprehensive do not address farm subsidies or export subsidies. Most don't have good sanitary and phytosanitary agreements. Even Canada, we've signed 1 RTA, NAFTA, 8 FTAs. We're currently negotiating 12 more agreements. We've signed 35 foreign investment agreements and 9 trade and investment support agreements. So Canada has definitely joined this process as well, but we can't say that it has in any way has the effect that a WTO agreement could. Free trade agreements are a game of the powerful and the titans. I don't know of any free trade agreement that hasn't been negotiated with geopolitical, military, food security, or other issues involved in the negotiations at the same time. For small countries like Canada, we usually come late and we usually get less in free trade agreements. They are defensive for us. If another major beef exporting nation or pork exporting nation has or is about to get tariff relief through a free trade agreement, we must be there. We must attempt to negotiate ours, but it is purely defensive. It removes the common rules for everybody. Just in Asia, the current series of free trade agreements is too complex to track. They are a series of preferential agreements, and quite frankly, it is absolutely we believe from a Canadian perspective, it is no substitute for a comprehensive World Trade Organization agreement with one world, one agreement, one set of rules, applying to all, the large, the small, the strong, and the weak. Thank you. And by the way, the current estimates are that if the WTO agreement was signed today, in the next 10 years after signing, world wealth levels would increase between $1 and $3 trillion. Our own industry believes that signing, as it exists right now, would see an increase of $1 billion in Canadian beef exports and approximately $600 million in Canadian pork exports. And even if it's half of that, what a dividend to trade this would represent.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks for the history lesson. Thanks for a compelling and passionate address. I'm going to leave questions and comments on Ted's address until after the next speaker.